6:42, you're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Anne.
Yeah, and you are watching, which is lovely. Yeah.
Yes.
We were saying earlier that we get up and we sit in a studio and we don't really know what you, even if the sun's come up outside, are you watching? And yes, you are. Nick says, yes, there are many of us watching, even at this ungodly hour. Keep up the fantastic work.
Linda says, I'm watching, as I do every morning.
And Gary in Cambodia says, morning to you, Stephen and Anne. It's already midday here. I do get up out of bed at around 5, though, every morning, one of the best times of the day.
It is a lovely time of the day, but sometimes you just need to...
You have a tough time convincing people that actually early morning is brilliant.
James says, sitting watching your show and looking out at the sunrise.
Tom says, love to get up and turn on the telly to you two. Makes a good start to my day. Thank you.
And Sue in Lincolnshire says, I'm up every morning to watch GB News and I have a diabetic dog, so she needs early morning feeding and then injecting. I often think it must be very difficult with diabetic pets, because you can't... You don't monitor their glucose levels and things. You just have to... I don't know, hope for the best.
No. Didn't even know there was such thing as a diabetic dog.
It must be very difficult. Must be very difficult.
Oh, well. You learn all about life here, don't you?
Oh, you do? Well, that's the nice thing about it. Let's look at the Sunday Times, should we? It leads with the BBC crisis as a TV presenter is alleged to have paid a teen for sex photos.
In the Telegraph, however, George Osborne's big wedding day is making the front page picture because a protester ran up to him and his new bride as they came out of the church and threw orange confetti all over them.
The Sunday People says plain stupid Tories as the government spends $800,000 on painting a UK flag on Rishi Sunak's jet.
And finally, the Sunday Express. The banks have been accused of putting the nation's security at risk by refusing to do business with Britain's defence industry.
So it might cost that much.
We're learning more and more about what the banks just like to do because they can do it.
Yeah, well...
Aren't we?
No, it's a bit worrying. Let's talk to writer and journalist Emma Wolfe and deputy editor of Spite, Fraser Myers, who are both here this morning.
Morning.
Good to see you. Nice to see you. Emma, let's start with the BBC crisis. Look at the Sunday Mirror's take on this.
Yeah, well, it's a really unhappy story for everybody involved, isn't it? The Mirror's take is that this BBC presenter, who has still not been named, was partying with bosses even after the official complaint was made. So apparently on May the 19th, the mother of this young person had made an official complaint, and only a few weeks later, the presenter himself was, I have to be very careful about what I say, I suppose, was enjoying drinks and a 3-course meal with bosses and colleagues and elite celebrities at an exclusive venue. So clearly the official complaint hadn't been taken seriously enough for this person to be maybe put aside while it was investigated, or that the investigation wasn't really taken seriously enough. Sorry, it's very hard to know what to say. It's all, you know, one has to remember people are innocent until proven guilty, but it's just
What do you think of the
situation.
fact, though, that, yes, the person is innocent until proven guilty, but by the sheer fact that we know it is a household name, presenter of the BBC, that tars everybody there with the same brush?
Well, and you've had this extraordinary, almost like reverse I Am Spartacus thing going on at the BBC, where people have been coming out, you know, you've had Gary Lineker, Nicky Campbell, Ryland, various other people, Jeremy Vine, having to say explicitly, it's not me, I'm not this person. So, yeah, it puts everyone in an incredibly difficult position. I do completely understand the wariness to name people or to, you know, make these accusations public, because we have been here before. You know, 10 years ago, after Savile, there was a kind of rush to root out anyone else we'd missed, almost, in the past, you know, few decades. And lots of people who were innocent were dragged through the courts, you know, not just named, not just had their reputations tarnished, they actually had to face trial and things like that. So I can understand the wariness on that side too, but...
So how do you handle it? Because obviously the BBC is going to come in for a lot of criticism in the way they've handled this, but it's very difficult to see how else they could have.
Well, yes, but
could they have looked at the evidence like the Sun has?
but the policeman Mark Williams-Thomas is in the Mirror, who had revealed the Jimmy Savile situation. He is saying in the Mirror, you know, this man should have been suspended pending investigation, and I think that's the basic. Of course, people are innocent until proven guilty, but at least the complaint should have been taken more seriously than this. And yet this person was out and able to mingle with colleagues and, you know...
Well, stay on air.
Stay on air and actually be out at celebrities and drinking. And
But, you know, even that's difficult, isn't it? Because if you were a household name, always on
you're suddenly
the telly,
pulled off.
and suddenly you're pulled off, that's going... Yeah, you're almost being declared guilty and having to prove your innocence.
Well, that's the thing, and if the BBC, you know, no one has been suspended yet, but if someone was suspended, then we'd know exactly
Well,
who
but we are
it
told
is.
this person has been suspended,
Oh, OK, sorry.
but only just very recent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the
papers
detail in-
Only when the
overnight,
Sun...
they were saying...
Only when the Sun, you know, rang the BBC and said, we know about this.
Yeah.
Did they then suspend him?
Yeah, but the details that are coming out about sort of, you know, £5,000 lump sums of cash being sent over, whoever this is, you know, we are in a situation now where there's no question that they were friends or that they were sort of having a relationship. You know, we all know now this is wrong. This is an era in which people are highly aware that this kind of thing, explicit photos being sent online, this kind of thing is absolutely, if not an abuse of power, you know, criminal.
Yeah.
So it sort of beggars belief that anybody could have gone into this and carried on doing this in recent years. I think it dates from 2020. It'll come out. It really will. It'll come out. It'll be in the next few days. I mean,
Yes, it will be.
there's been names
The
swirling
pressure is
around
on right
all
now.
night.
Yeah.
Of course, there have.
Graham's been in touch. Hi, Graham. Says, I agree with Stephen. It's very frustrating because we all want to know who it is, but it has to be done correctly.
Yeah.
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
It's a very,
I think
very-
the other thing is don't believe everything you read on social media at the moment. Because
Yeah.
if people on social media are naming the name, then there's an awful high chance that they are probably really wrong and defaming somebody.
And
Yeah.
poor Nikki Campbell has been wrongly, you know,
Trolled,
accused
isn't
and
he? Yeah.
trolled over this. So, yeah, do not believe what you read on Twitter, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then again, it's a large group of people all sharing what they're hearing, and it's sort of
Yeah.
like a public marketplace. I mean, yeah, I'm very, very disenchanted with Twitter at the moment as well. But I think, you know, it's a lot of people saying, well, this is what I've heard, this is what I've heard, and eventually one of those names will float to the top.
Well, it will. And as you say, it's going to be very soon, isn't it? Because you
Well.
can feel the pressure on.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the Mail on Sunday, Fraser, should we? Where they say, not even weddings are sacred for Just Stop Oil.
I mean, this is a pretty extraordinary story. Just Stop Oil have done the impossible, and they're making people feel sorry for George Osborne. You know, one of the most disliked people in politics, but they've disrupted It's not actually necessarily clear that this was a Just Stop Oil plug.
No, they haven't sort of
They
officially
haven't
claimed
officially claimed.
responsibility.
But the orange thing was...
The orange is obviously related
Just a
to
bit
Just
of
Stop Oil.
confetti. It was just a bit of confetti.
The Just Stop Oil tweeted it, saying, you know, talking about... They tweeted the video of it.
Here we're seeing pictures of George Osborne and his new bride, and then this sort of middle-aged-ish looking woman rushes up and throws confetti on them, but it happens to be orange. She walks off looking rather pleased with herself. And a security man who didn't step in soon enough, frankly, sort of told her to go. I just think it's a terrible shame. And you say it's just confetti, but it could have been anything.
No, I know. No, I was being silly. It's charming. I like seeing middle-aged people getting married again. I think it gives everybody hope. I like this wedding.
Fantastic.
It's sweet.
Do you?
I do. I think
It's a
there's...
controversial wedding, of course, for all other reasons.
Yeah.
You know, this email doing the rounds.
Yeah,
It was sent to all the guests.
exactly. It clearly hasn't been an easy few weeks for them. No, I like the idea that, you know, life isn't over at the age of 40 and that they've found new love again. And all of that.
Absolutely.
I think it's nice.
Excuse me.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm not a George Osborne fan at all, but it sort of slightly warmed my heart that lovely Theo Rogers could marry her former boss, George Osborne.
Oh, can I ask you? was it last weekend? There was Virginia Woolf has there's a trigger warning put in one of the books. I said, we need to talk to Emma Woolf about this one. I can't remember what relation you are now.
She's my father's aunt, so she's my great aunt.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you make of these trigger warnings? I can't think what it was about.
I can't remember which book.
But there was a
can't-
trigger
On all her
warning.
books.
Is it on
They
all
said
her
on
books?
pretty much all of them.
Because she's a person of, I don't know...
Of history.
Yeah, that's right.
Because she was writing in the early 1900s, the early 20th
Person of
century.
interest.
So what do you think? There should be trigger warnings in these things?
No, I can't bear it. I can't bear this rewriting of Roald Dahl and this rewriting of Ian Fleming and all of that. It's absolutely ludicrous. And I think we're really losing, history and culture and our literature. We're denuding it, we're stripping it. If we make everything conform to these kind of 2023 standards, where anything offensive makes you rush off and hide under the desk and find a safe space and have a comfort animal or whatever.
I mean, I totally agree with you about rewriting. I think that's completely wrong. But what's wrong with a little trigger warning somewhere saying this was written at a different time, and you know, if you're offended by some of the attitudes, you know, just remember the context in which this was written.
I think you're right. I wouldn't call it a trigger warning, because that, to me, is triggering. It's just very, very irritating. But I think there's nothing wrong, and publishers have always done this, with having disclaimers, if you want to, in the front of a book saying, you know, be aware. I was rereading Neville Shute, who's another wonderful writer, but he does include some quite racist, quite very, very sexist, but very racist stuff. And it's uncomfortable when you read that. And same with Virginia Woolf. There are She talked about my great-uncle as I'm to marry a penniless Jew. Well, we wouldn't say that nowadays, and it's quite offensive to sort of the Woolf side of the family, a penniless Jew. But it was in the context. It was a sort of loving little joke. And so I think it's easy to retrospectively go back and start accusing people of...
Find offence where there wasn't any.
Find offence where really it wasn't intended, or whether that was just part of the culture at the time.
She would, however, still be pleased to know that she was making you feel uncomfortable just reading it.
Absolutely, and still
that's what she was all about.
Yeah.
And also, look at Orlando. It's about cross-dressing, it's about transgender, it's about people going from being male to female. I think, let's have a campaign to forget all this nonsense about the BBC. Let's have a campaign for everybody to reread Orlando and...
I've never read it.
Well, there you go. This is a woman who becomes a man over the centuries. It's incredibly gender fluid, incredibly trendy in kind of today's terms. Yeah. It was the last Virginia Woolf I'd never read, and I read it last year. I was like, wow, she's a completely different writer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And, of course, that amazing movie that was recently made, Orlando, by the woman who made the piano.
Oh.
Jane Campion.
Jane Campion. Yeah, I've probably got that wrong. Somebody Potter made Sally somebody. Anyway,
After watching the piano, I don't think
there's a new film of
made by the same person, actually. But there you go.
Well, there you go. Fascinating. Fraser, let's have a look at woke banks in the Sunday Express.
Yeah, so this is an interesting story. There are these rules called environmental, social and governance rules. And they're kind of a voluntary thing, but lots of banks sign up to them, lots of companies want to be seen to have these high environmental or social scores. So they're basically getting more and more involved in politics, in a sense. They want to, you know, companies are not saying, look, here my product is excellent, I'm going to make a good profit. They're saying, we're doing all this stuff for the environment, we're doing all this stuff for social stuff.
We have a rainbow flag.
We have a rainbow flag, we are pro-diversity,
pronouns.
Things like that. And so it's an interesting, it's an interesting kind of melding of sort of politics and business. And now this is starting to hit defence companies. Now, you and I might have a view on what we think about people who make weapons, whether we have a moral view on that. In some contexts, it's obviously bad if we don't want, you know, weapons being shipped off to nasty regimes. But in a context like the war in Ukraine, clearly they're very necessary. Yeah. Or if we're talking about defending ourselves, potentially, from a threat. So it's slightly worrying that you have banks weighing in on whether this is moral or not.
Is it their job to weigh in on a moral decision?
That's the thing. You know, we can all take our own view on what's moral and immoral, what businesses we like and don't like. But when you have banks and people with financial power making those decisions on our behalf, seemingly, that's when we should be worried. That seems like an abuse of power to me.
Well, it's a very interesting one. Banks are coming under the spotlight a lot at the minute, and rightly so, I think. Look, sadly, we've got to leave it there. Emma Woolf, Fraser Myers, thank you both. We'll see you a little bit later on. This is Breakfast on GB News. Let's get a check on your weather forecast for today.